Hey, John, good morning. We have a really interesting conversation for today's topic. You and I have decided we're going to dissect or go through the organize our own value step within Scaled Agile, within the implementation roadmap. And we want to highlight the usage of the the value stream identification and art implementation workshop. That's a mouthful. What we're going to do, though, is be safe friendly without being safe blind. In other words, you and I have some different experiences, approaches, things we've learned from our experience in lean supply chain, lean manufacturing, working with organizations, lean product development. We're going to bring up some of those experiences that are additive, sometimes course correction to what Scaled Agile addresses. As we get into it, I want to share that I've seen the Scaled Agile approach work, but I also want people to know there are alternatives. There are different ways to look at this. And sometimes it's a better approach to look at it differently. With that being said, let's talk about how we get there, first of all. And John, you were mentioning it before, how you're always pouring through the website, and you absolutely are. You're the king of that, knowing what's out there, what's available, and all of that. A lot of people aren't aware that you can get to this information without even opening up the toolkit. And the best way to start is click on the implementation roadmap. And as you go down into the implementation roadmap and you see the details, and we keep scrolling down, and there's a set of steps, we're going to focus today on step 6, organize around value. And that's a critical one because when the implementation roadmap first came out, the step was here, but the emphasis was not. And that's where principle 10, safe principle 10 came from, is organize around value. This is an absolutely critical step to optimizing flow of value, to getting success from safe. In fact, when we see companies struggle, 9 times out of 10, if not more often, it's because they skipped step 6. They never organized around value. They took their current team structure, their current siloed approach, and tried to put the safe wrapper over the top. And then they wonder why safe isn't really providing the benefits it should. Because you and I are both huge fans of the framework. It works, but not if you skip step 6. It doesn't. So I want to just get this kicked off and then let you really run with it, because this organize around value step is such a critical component. And as we go down, here's the essence of the workshop. And before we do that, I want to show everyone how you can actually get to it. Again, we don't want to show the actual workshop. Not everyone watching this is an SBC, has access to it. So we want to honor the IP of Scaled Agile. But if you're an SPC and you're logged in and you go to the practice step and you go to Safe Toolkits, and you can scroll down through Safe Toolkits, and you will see the Value Stream and Art Identification Workshop Toolkit. That's a mouthful. Downloading that, pretty simple. You just say, yeah, that's what I want. You click download. You do need to accept the terms. Again, that's honoring their IP. There's a lot of work and effort put into this. Once you accept that, you can download it. And I want to switch screens real quick.
Hey, Dwayne, just really
Yeah,
quick.
yeah, please.
Think about back when we became SBCs, none of these toolkits existed.
Yeah, great point. And that's again in honor. You and I can sometimes be a bit critical of Scaled Agile, and maybe critical isn't the right word. Uh, Holding accountable, but the framework works. The company has done so much to bring out toolkits like this, things that can really help people move forward. I think the biggest unfortunate part of all the stuff that's available, very few people, one, even know it's there, and two, of the ones that know it's there, don't know how to use it. They don't know how to apply it. Now, Scaled Agile is trying to do something about that with the microcerts and things like that. Hopefully that's a good approach. Time will tell. But that's what I often see, is they don't even know it's available. Now, the biggest blocker is, no, we already have our teams. We're good. Let's just launch safe around it. Ugh, no, that's not what you want to do.
Hey,
So
Dwayne,
anyways,
you just mentioned something I want to bring up
yeah,
really quick.
yeah,
So for anybody watching this, if you do want that microcert, contact us because we can
Yeah.
actually teach that. We do it in opens and stuff like that. So Dwayne and I are certified in actually helping you become more knowledgeable in doing the value stream identification workshop. But I will
Right.
add this, even that micro certification that you as an SPC can get, it's not going to give you all the knowledge. It's just training. You've got to experience this. Find somebody you can buddy up with and go experience this, or do a bunch of stuff on your own and walk through it. Find somebody to review your work and say, here's what I'm thinking, because there's a lot of thinking goes on in here.
Yeah. It's the difference between someone that has passed the bar exam and a real attorney. The real attorney has spent time in the courtroom, has spent time with clients, looking at all the different information needed to defend a client or support a client or whatever. That's the real difference. And you're right. The microcerts are super helpful, but they still can't fill the gap of real experience. So once you have downloaded that, I want to briefly show what that would look like. It comes down, again, Scaled Agile has a really good consistency approach. It always looks the same. It comes down in a zip file approach. You double click on that zip file and you see what's in it, and you can extract that zip file. And they have this very common comfortable format structure or directory structure within it, getting started. How can I use this? All of that preparation, some really good stuff, facilitating the templates, the handouts. There's even workbooks for it. Now, again, I don't want to go too deep into this because this is really requires an SPC certification to access. So what we want to do instead is talk about what anyone can see, and that is all that's available on the website. And there's a lot of similarity between what's available on the website. The the PowerPoints themselves are essentially a replication, a consolidation. What am I trying to say, John? It's a
Reuse,
step-by-step
reuse of
approach.
the images and content.
It's what?
Reuse of the images and content.
Yes, thank you. So let's talk about organize around value. John, why do we organize around value? Why is this such a big deal? Why is it a safe principle?
Well, it really goes back to the body of knowledge of lean. And it goes all the way back to Toyota. And it goes back to the fact that for us to get something out the door to somebody who wants something, that's the customer. And for an operational value stream, that's the paying customer. For a development value stream, those are the folks in the operational value stream. So you got to sort through that. But Ajay Toyota, and he was the CEO back in the 50s and 60s of Toyota, he said all value delivered to a customer is the end result of a horizontal process that runs across all the vertical organizations, the functional areas, the silos in an enterprise. And this gets into what John Cotter, Dr. Cotter talks about in that dual operating system. We got to figure out the knowledge and skills that we need in our development value streams to create something that's going to be used in our operational value stream.
And that's where a lot of the challenge comes in to Principle 10, to this step, is unfortunately there is a culture in many companies of don't open that box. Let's not look behind that door. And the concern is if we do, you're going to want to move people around. You're going to want to reorganize. Yes, we do around value because that optimizes outcomes for the customer, for the business. Yeah, but that could take away some of my autonomy, some of my authority, some of my control. We like to say illusion of control. And it is a scary thing for people to look at. My world could change by running this workshop. Yeah. The goal is that it improves for the better, that it gets much better than it is today. That's really what organizing around value means. Even for the people that are struggling with this concept, looking at it about don't touch my silo, don't touch my current paradigm, it's going to turn out to be a much better approach. It's different. It's uncomfortable for them. I've always said people are not afraid of change. They're afraid of unknown outcomes. If you're going to run, no, not if, when you run this workshop, you need to make sure people understand this is in their best interest. Everyone involved, it's in their best interest. So, John, the 6 steps that we talk about, And this is where we're going to get to that safe friendly without being safe blind approach. There are times that the approach that Safe describes works pretty well. In fact, I'm working with a client now that we're probably using this exact approach. There are many times where it doesn't. It can actually reinforce current silos. It can do the opposite of what you said, Toyota said about it, is that you need to consider that horizontal view of value across, not just that vertical approach. So the first one is identify the operational value streams. Absolutely. That's one. You have to start with who are we supporting? And this is where you start to understand statements like by what Dr. Alan Ward said, that development value streams, the next part we're going to talk about, do one of three things. They create, update, or deprecate operational value stream steps. So he was very specific to a manufacturing concept. In lean product development, it's maybe not as tightly coupled, not as clean as that statement, but we still have to remember that development value streams support operational value streams, not solutions, not capabilities, operational value streams, because that's where we actually consume those solutions to support the customer. But then once
And Dwayne,
yes, please.
on that, so everybody should know, the way that Dwayne just described that, from a lean perspective, realize the development value streams create all of the organizational assets an operational value stream uses, not just the electronic systems that most of us talk about in SAFE.
Yeah.
It's a lot deeper than that when you start thinking lean. So when you're doing lean product development, just consider, here's a nuance. When you're talking lean, a development value stream is creating all of those things. In SAFE, we focus on those systems.
For example, one commonly missed area, process flows, reporting, documentation, things like that, that are still consumed in the operational value stream. There's still a set of steps we go through. There's a group of people that supports that delivers that value. So you're right. We can't just think of the software approach, even the hardware approach. It's much more than that. But real quick on value streams, John, and this getting to the basics of what a value stream does is so critical. First of all, you rarely, if ever, create value streams. You are identifying what already exists. If you're delivering capabilities, if your operational value stream is up and running and your development value stream is supporting that, and I'll go down here to show a little bit more the difference between the two. But if you have development value streams that are supporting those, in other words, we've got a billing system, but it needs to change, update, keep maintained, and so forth. You have development value streams. You're not creating anything. The rare occurrence where you actually do create a DVS, development value stream, is when you're creating new operational value stream steps, or you're creating brand new operational value stream. You're going into a new market, a new area, whatever it might be. And it's a very different way than you currently deliver value. So in most of the cases, what, John, 95% of the time, 99% of the time, you are identifying what already exists.
Yep, we're truly getting into, and I can't emphasize that enough, we're not creating them. We're identifying your flow in your organization today across, with all of the people, across all of the functional areas or silos or COEs that you talk, the way you talk about in your organization, that whole flow from start to finish. And it's probably a lot longer than you might think. It has a lot more knowledge and skills in there than you might be thinking.
Yeah. So just a quick recap on the types of value streams so that we can get to the gist of this conversation. Excuse me, operational value streams, that is where we deliver value to the customer. It's typically where we're working with the customer, interacting with the customer. Customers rarely, if ever, interact with the development value streams. They interact with the operational value streams. But really important, the enterprise owns those. It's not a customer journey map, although you see some similarities, some parallels, if you will, but it is the enterprise's steps that they go through to deliver value. There was a question yesterday that I was answering about value streams, and if I can remember the comment I gave, if you think about the difference between capabilities, solutions, and value streams, capabilities are the things that we deliver that are valuable. The value streams are the actions we go through to deliver those capabilities. And so they are tightly coupled, but they're absolutely not the same. So the first step, John, you and I both agree with this one, is identifying operational value streams. Um, I want to hear your thoughts. Scaled Agile has here's the four common types. And I do agree with those four common types, but the understanding of the four types, I don't know if I see as much value there. It's, as you said, just understanding how does value flow.
And I guess I agree with you on the types. The when you get into it, I think one of the thoughts we need to keep in mind when we do this, and one of the things, and this comes from this comes actually from the book Scaling Lean and Agile Development. That's Larman's book.
Mm-hmm.
But he talks about how this operational value stream, look at that endpoint. When we're talking about it, it really is that end customer who's providing that value to the company in an operational value stream. The last one, that annual audit, that one's an internal, what we in Scale Agile call an internal value stream. But we want to be really careful about this, because in Lean, and this goes back to what Larman said, in Lean, value is defined in the eyes of the external customer.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to be really careful on that.
The audit requirement is a ability, it's an enabler to allow us to deliver the other types of value, the key value that we actually deliver. The customer doesn't care about your audit requirements unless you get put out of business and you can no longer support them. It's the only reason they care about those. So I agree to be careful with those patterns, those types. When we're doing OVS identification, you go into a large company, 75,000, 100,000 people, even 10,000, and you could be talking about multiple operational value streams, OVSs. Where do you start? You can't start with the whole thing, but you do want to have enough to hang your hat on, if you will. So having an overall idea, well, what do we think the different types are? And Scaled Agile talks about, well, from a bank, consumer banking, corporate banking, capital markets, well, that's a really good high-level place to start. But even within that, within consumer banking, yeah, there's some very different OVS patterns here. From cards to banking to loans, they don't operate the same way. And the triggers are very different. The outcomes are very different. The revenue received is a different approach. So then we say, well, then let's focus in on loans. And one of the things we've always done, John, is where do you focus first? Where do you think the opportunities are? Just swag, just gut instinct. Where do you think the real opportunities are? That's where you start. Do you want to have enough understanding of how the other ones work? Yeah, but you deeper dive into the area where you think the ops are. John, sorry.
No, it's all good. So on this picture, and Dwayne and I know the folks who actually did this analysis. This is a real life example, by the way. But it's really important to know this is a really, really, really big financial institution.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll notice here they identified 7 operational value streams. I just want to bring up, even in a big company, you don't have 100 operational value streams.
No.
If you do, you might be looking at it a little bit wrong. As a matter of fact, in Lean Thinking somewhere, and I don't have the page mark, so I can't find it. Even Womack and Jones said in Lean Thinking, most even good-sized organizations have 7 plus or minus 2, 10 or 12 operational value streams. So we're not trying to define 100 of them here. This is a pretty solid picture. Here's 7 of them.
Yeah. And you and I have both done this. In fact, you and I worked at a client together where we had that kind of a picture. Very large financial institution. Can you start with everything all at once? Not at a deep level. No. High level, sure. Let's just get placeholders, sticky notes in place to say, hey, we're going to come back to this later. But we find the area that we're going to focus in on. But then the next step that the workshop helps you with is, and this is one of the more challenging steps that people think, well, this is easy. No, it's not, is getting that actual definition. Are we on the same page? I think back to Jeffrey Moore's quote about how misaligned organizational leadership can be. And it's not through lack of trying. It's because they never stop to have the same statement, to work on a statement together that says, this is what we do. In fact, when I start value stream identification workshops, one of the first questions I ask is, if you stop delivering tomorrow, who suffers and how do they suffer? What's the struggle that's going to happen? Is it the end customer? Is it people using the OVS supporting the customer? It helps clarify what we actually do for value. But once we've got that statement in place, now it's identifying the solutions. And John, this is where you and I look at this and say it's not necessarily wrong, but there's a different approach. And there are cases where I have seen that once we have the operational value stream and then we jump right to the solutions, it can very easily turn into reinforcing the current silos rather than truly organizing around value.
And there's a couple parts of that. Number one, in these examples, the phrase that I use, this is a less complex example. In an enterprise, you will find complexities. You might find a bridge, you might find converging value streams. So as part of this, we are using, I don't want to use the word simple because there's no value stream that's really simple, but it's a less complex version. When we walk through this with this article, you can get a whole lot more complex. As a matter of fact, again, I'll refer to Womack and Jones a lot, but they have an example about the enterprise level confluence of value streams just to buy a can of Coke. And when you start thinking about that complexity, it can get kind of weird. So be aware of that. So that's the first aspect, the complexity factor. So this is a less complex example. But the second thing that Dwayne just brought up, and I'll bring it up here, in order to get to this point, if you just take a look at, all of the verticals, going back to what Ajay Toyota said, if you think of the knowledge and skills that come from all of those places to get a new solution from start to finish for that operational value stream to use, you have to know all the knowledge and skills, which means you have to identify what are all the silos in your organization that are providing those knowledge and skills to get these updates. This really gets into, there's an idea in the customer centricity article on whole product thinking. That's from Theodore Levitt. But you've got to figure out what are all the silos, the functions that are part of your organization, because you got to touch them all. And that includes finance and marketing and legal and supply chain. Obviously, we've got product in there. So all of these different places. By the way, my list is a whole lot longer, but there's more groups involved, actually more knowledge and skills involved in getting here than you might first think. It doesn't mean that you're going to establish your first arts with all of them, because you might be constrained by organizational constraints. Organizational required impediments is what I love to call them.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great tie into what I wanted to point out. And this is really the gist of this discussion that we wanted to convey. Let's look at this core banking example, a great example. If we focus on this solution, what tends to happen is we start to focus on the solution and not the value it creates, not the value it delivers. The banking customers here could not care less about your core banking system. That is not a customer-centric view. But we can very easily say, oh, it's core banking that supports these steps. Let's focus on core banking. Well, it's an intermediary focus. Absolutely. We have to be really careful that we continue to focus on the operational value stream steps and improving those. Here's one case in point that can happen quite often. And this is where we get that struggle of IT versus business, when in reality, IT exists really just to support business. So we have this core banking system. And if we organize around the core banking system, how do we prioritize between these steps? And there are ways to do that, absolutely. But how do we truly focus on it? And the other problem is we are already assuming that is the right system approach way to support that OVS. And we get the blinders on. We get that blank view of, well, this is how it works. How can we optimize within that? And we lose a lot of the improvement opportunities. For example, closing the loan. Now, the core banking may not be the greatest example because when banks are using these external systems, it's kind of an all or nothing approach. It's a big bang. But we've got internally developed systems and so forth. We assume closing the loan belongs under that core banking, and we just go forward with that. When we really think about supporting the operational value stream step, excuse me, then we stop to think about, is that the right way? Is it the right approach? So just some of the cautionary tales about being careful about how quickly you go into the direct steps that Scaled Agile is supporting. Again, in many cases, they work quite well, but there are cases where they don't. And this comes back to, John, what you said earlier about the usage of the microcerts and the experience behind it. You and I have seen this 100 times, probably more. And we look at that and we can look at a value stream as we're identifying it, as the information is emerging, as we're putting sticky notes on the wall and we're starting to get a visualization of how value truly flows. And we start to see patterns. We start to see from experience, yeah, let's be careful not to isolate, silo in on this. You're going to reinforce your existing silos. And that's why you're coming to SAFE in the first place, is to reduce the delays, reduce the handoffs, reduce the dependencies. And in some cases, this can actually cause us to reinforce those dependencies.
Hey, Dwayne.
Yeah.
As we go down and dig a little bit deeper, something that's really important about this operational value stream, you're showing it just fine right now. But think about this. Your organization might be set up today that thing that you're trying to identify crosses not only silos, but I've worked with some organizations where those steps in green, the way the company makes money, cross business units.
Mm-hmm.
Notice this operational value stream is agnostic to your organizational structure today. It doesn't care. It's how you get value. And that's something that as you do this, you've got to balance keeping that thought in mind while making your boss happy that you're going to create an arc someday.
Yeah. It's like letting your cat out the door and they wander over to the neighbor's yard. They don't know they're in the neighbor's yard. They just know that they're putting out treats for them or something. And that's a crude analogy, but we have to stop thinking about the organizational structure we have created and identify how value truly is delivered. Again, back to you are identifying what already exists, not creating something new. Lean 101 is start with where you are. Lean 102 says, okay, what's the next step? What's the next version? But Lean 101 is follow the bouncing ball of value. Where does it go? And John, for me, that's one of the biggest challenges in running this workshop, this approach, is getting people to take those blinders off and see the whole picture. You could say it's applying systems thinking, if you will, but it's seeing how value flows from inception all the way to measurement and rinse and repeat. And that's another key point about value streams to point out. They're repetitive. You keep going through that same value, especially DVSs. We tend to think of DVSs as project type approaches. No, this isn't for a project. This is when we're going to improve this operational value stream. What are the typical steps we go through? That's a DVS. It's not for this particular project, it's in general. So, John, once we have identified the solutions, one approach, our approach as an alternative might be more about, okay, let's identify the steps that we go through to support this OVS, which sometimes involves updating multiple systems, multiple solutions. In fact, to your point about complexity, more often than not, it does involve multiple systems, multiple solutions. But then finding
and
people.
often,
Go ahead.
think about what Dwayne just said on that one. If you've got a complex system, you're working for a telecom company, for example, and you're creating mobile apps and you're adding one button, the way you're currently set up, you might touch 10 teams to get that functionality to work all the way through the way that you today perceive your systems. But to an operational value stream, that's just one easy thing that we think should be improved. And it'll take you a year to add a button for something, to show, to show a new functionality to add streaming or something, really simple button. But this will help you identify those connections. I actually heard somebody use a great word the other day. It was fractured dependencies, not just dependency, but fractured. That when you're doing this, you automatically jump to, yeah, but today's world, those folks are over there.
Yeah. Almost spider web dependencies. And the intricacies of that just get, again, you pointed it out. This is a fairly simplistic view of a value stream. We're not even talking about the branches within it, where, well, what if the loan application isn't completed? We need to follow up with them. There's a branch. There's exceptions to that. We still want to support the customer. But the bottom line here is to get to the understanding the DVSs. And this is another area where I want to caution, clarify from what Scaled Agile puts out, is it does appear as if we are creating, hey, we're just grabbing some people and saying, this makes sense. There's more to it than that. John, what are some of the key things that you have to go beyond just, oh, let's pull these people together and call that a DVS? It's more than that, right?
Oh, absolutely. And when we see those three little chevrons there, and again, I've been pulled into organizations that have essentially followed this guidance, and they end up with agile release trains supporting development value streams that have dev and test, maybe data on it, and a product owner. And they always wonder, should that product owner come from IT or the business? Notice even that question to me is wrong. It says, no, we need a product owner that's part of the development value stream. Where they come from, as you start taking this holistic or more holistic view of this, you start realizing we need knowledge and skills from lots of different places, not necessarily people, even though this designates people, but we need somebody who has insight into that market research or the market segmentation or the licensing and pricing and all those kinds of things. That's the skills that people carry into this development value stream. And it might not be in your, and I'm using quotes here, IT group. It's over there. I worked with one Epic owner. This was for a technology company, about 5,000 people. And in writing epics that are going to end up driving features, I asked him, did you get that market analysis? And his response was essentially, no, we don't get to see that. And yet this is an Epic owner trying to drive new work. So again, there's lots more knowledge and skills that need to be part of that development value stream than you might currently be thinking.
And John, I want to wrap this conversation up before we cause people to drive off the road as they're listening. But one of the key points that I would like to see perhaps clarified and just better understood is a statement I have highlighted. It's focused on requirements. Well, first of all, we don't really focus on requirements. We focused on what are the opportunities, and we're discovering what the solution needs to be. So being careful with that whole requirement concept. In fact, I always work with clients and advocate for flexible specifications, not requirements. And some people may say, oh my gosh, our systems are so complex, we need requirements. The more complex your system is, the more you need to start with flexible specifications. However, if you look at this statement, if most requirements necessitate touching all solutions to enable the new functionality, there's likely only one development value stream. If the solutions are decoupled, there might be a few of them. That is not a customer-centric view. That is not an OVS-centric view. It is a capability view. It is a solution view. It is a, we have this system. If multiple people need to touch it across these different boundaries, well, then maybe that's one development value stream. That's not quite how it works. People are not resources. They are people. They are more fungible. In fact, what I've seen is when we look at the true flow of value, optimize, organize around that, it requires architectural changes and learning, organizational learning, so that more people can touch that same system. And yes, across art boundaries, even perhaps across development value stream boundaries. And the reason that's a good thing One, it optimizes for flow of value, focused on supporting the OVS and focused on the customer. It's not focused on improving the system. It's focused on improving the experience. But two, it forces you to build a better architecture, a more loosely coupled approach, a more touchable, less fragile type of architecture where you can have multiple people simultaneously updating this system from different vantage points, and it is still working correctly because of our built-in quality approach, because of our improved architecture. So we have to be careful to not look at this and say, oh, well, this is a solution, and we have to have all the people together that are working on that solution. Well, that's usually an architectural constraint. That's usually a mindset constraint. It's not a true technology constraint. John, anything to add to that before we wrap up? I find that is one of the most common fallacies, misunderstandings about development value streams is that they have to be organized around a system, a solution.
Versus the step itself. So I'll add this thought, and this is a connection to another part of SAFe. So for those of you people who are SPCs and others that are trying to use this, a really important thought, what we're looking at here is a collection of development value streams that support an operational value stream. Even if there were 3 or 4, that would still be a collection of development value streams. And I want to draw your thinking to the definition of a portfolio. When we talk about it in SAFe, a portfolio is a collection of development value streams. So another way to look at it, and we've got the enterprise article that goes down some different paths on how to identify those portfolios. But a way that you might think about it is a portfolio is a collection of development value streams that support an operational value stream. And then you've got this idea of who are we supporting, and you kind of tie some things up with a bow. Again, you've got to read some things like portfolio and lean budgeting and some other things to see that my comment, but I wanted to raise that because this gives you some insight. Doing this activity, doing value stream identification and being honest with yourselves is going to give you a lot of insight into the company you're working for, or for those of us who are consultants with.
Oh, John, that's such a critical point to end with. The honesty factor. Again, taking off the blinders, taking a very objective view of how value flows. That's really, it's in its simplest form. I love the phrase you always use. The answer is simple, but it ain't easy. In this case, the answer truly is simple. What makes it not easy, what makes it difficult is our current mindset, our siloed mindset, our focus on a specific solution and so forth. It's about optimizing value delivery. That's it. Now, the intricacies, the experience, the patterns and things, yeah, that's where it can get complex to really understand how to organize around it. But the goal, very simple. Organizing people around value so we can optimize flow value to the OVS and hence to the customer. All right, John, I think for our next conversation, we've given this baseline approach. You and I have talked about where we want to discuss this concept called the fuzzy front end. Because if you look at loan needed here, one of the issues there is, well, why is the loan needed? That trigger is actually farther upstream. Is it a family, a couple that are about to have their first child and need a vehicle loan? You're going to market to them, work with them very differently than if it's a couple about to retire that are looking to downsize their mortgage, their house. Understanding that front end is so much more important to that. And when we get into the DVSs, especially, we'll talk more about that. So with that, I want to wrap up for today, John. Any last comments you want to provide before we end the discussion?
No, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.